Struggling to monitor the growing threat landscape, pressure to reduce costs, security skill gaps, facing compliance issues? These issues can translate to operational, financial, regulatory, and reputational risks to your business. Checkpoint can help. Checkpoint combines an MSSP enablement program, cloud-delivered multi-tenant management, SOC platform, and superior threat intelligence capabilities to give MSSPs the confidence to grow profitably at a reduced risk. Checkpoint is 100% channel-driven. We partner to deliver the best security everywhere. Visit msspalert.com/checkpoint. All right, welcome back to Cyber for Hire, the Managed Security Podcast. Once again, I'm Bradley Barth with SC Media. In the first half of our show, we talked with Christine Owen at Guidehouse about going passwordless. But right now, I'd like to welcome back my co-host Ryan Morris from Morris Management Partners, because it's time for us to examine our MSSP industry strategy topic of the week, presenting our big idea in business: defining your geographic market. Stay regional or go global. You're a big fish in a pretty big pond, but there are vast oceans to explore. Do you test the waters or not? For MSSPs who have prospered regionally, there's a lot to be considered before expanding into new geographical territories, especially international markets, such as business culture differences, market preferences, regulatory factors, language barriers, and differences in cyber threat risk factors. This segment will examine these factors as well as the client's point of view. After all, you need to know how to sell to them as a newcomer in a particular market. So Ryan, as always, we're going to jump right into things. What are the pros and cons of supporting customers in different geographic regions, and why are some MSSPs better prepared to expand across borders than others?
You know, I think that the natural assumption that we have about any business, we would like to grow, and that means we need more customers to target. Let's put it this way, from a statistical point of view, in the managed services marketplace, it is surprising to me how very local we continue to be as service providers, as security providers. According to the latest research that I have been participating in, fewer than 5% of MSSPs claim to have or get noticeable and consistent revenue from clients across the entire country, right? So that's just one country. When you go from that into international considerations, it is a microscopic portion of the population that is large enough, sophisticated enough to do that, right? The old way that we used to describe geographic market reach for MSPs, for solution providers before the remote capabilities, we used to say, the channel is basically as big as they can drive in a single day. That would kind of define their geographic scope around their office. And again, more than 95% of solution providers still fall into that category. What's weird about that is that we do our job by definition almost entirely remote from the physical facilities that our customers maintain. We don't do monitoring and incident management and training and all of the services that we provide as a cybersecurity partner in person. Right. In fact, we asked that question coming back out of the pandemic, as there's been a lot of conversation about in-office, remote, etc. While a majority of MSSPs indicate that they themselves and their own employees are moving back into their office for physical work, fewer than 10% of them indicate that they do regular work in person at the customer's location. So it's still a statistical anomaly. What it says to me is, it's not that there's not a market out there. It's not that this isn't lucrative. It's that it's complicated and we haven't figured out how to do that yet.
All right, so Ryan, this next set of questions is all going to look at, understanding when is the right time to expand, and some of those first steps you might want to take too. So when is the right time? What boxes need to be checked first before you really even think of pushing out the boundaries of your territory? How do you define what your ideal target customer looks like? And once that's all established, Do you initially concentrate on the markets that are most alike to what you're already serving, a place where you might already have some built-in infrastructure? What's the playbook for your initial geographical expansion?
Okay, so lots of details to cover off on here. I believe that it's not a question of technological reach or even of local market dynamics, because cybersecurity seems to be both universal and random at the same time. And what I mean by that is that it's very rare that you will see any exploits that come in the United States that are fundamentally different than the technological profile of an exploit that's happening in Canada, in Mexico, in Europe, etc. Right? Obviously, there's going to be language barriers. Obviously, there are going to be some regulatory questions about what is a violation of privacy versus what is not, and a couple of other considerations. But the technology is fundamentally universal. It's just that we happen to get very micro targeted by the bad guys these days with things that sound like they are exclusively about us, right? That whole spear phishing concept is designed around not who you are, not where you are, but the information that they can use to convince them that they are directly connected to you. So I tend to think of it, logically speaking, as there is no fundamental technological reason why we cannot service customers beyond a local or a regional or a national boundary. I think the very fundamental question is, do you have the ability to engage on the front end with the customer onboarding process and to support customers with the occasional in-person resources that are needed to convince them that they are being carefully managed, that they are being personally watched out for in the business relationship. That might be monthly, that might be quarterly. It depends on the size and the scope of the services that we provide. But the vast majority of what we do for client relations post sales can be done in this kind of a remote meeting based format, right? There's very little reason for the technological side to say we must go there in person. Usually what we're going to be dealing with is just the relationship management side of things. The first thing that I would consider when I'm looking at a market expansion is, where do you possess expertise and where can you find another segment of customers that looks very much like the people who have the problem that you are presently an expert in solving? I prefer that being a geographic, let me say that differently. I prefer that to be a non-geographic but vertical market specialization when we're defining our outreach to customers, right? If I can say with credibility that I can service people in the medical field, in the financial services field, in the legal vertical, you know what? Lawyers in New York, lawyers in Los Angeles, they have very different personalities, but they have exactly the same technological setup. So we ought to be able to service them and those that cross even further international boundaries. They care more about whether we understand their industry and the regulations that they deal with than whether or not we are right down the road. Think about it this way. The logical boundary was, when I will allow you to provide me with an essential service in my technology environment that is performed anywhere beyond the four walls of my organization, as soon as you're outside those four walls, wherever your four walls happen to be, is irrelevant to me so long as you don't get caught by those regulatory boundaries, right? We all read the headlines last week of a couple of vendors that are getting in trouble and paying some substantial fines for capturing and retaining and then transmitting data about their customers across international boundaries. That's a big problem, something we definitely need to be aware of. But as long as you can understand, European data stays in Europe and Asian data stays in Asia, etc. Once you figure out those kinds of things, and you can design systems very easily to manage that kind of data residency, the rest of it is operational discipline and repeatability. If you are an expert in a market segment and you have defined, repeatable, scalable processes to engage, to manage, and to respond to the alerts for those kinds of customers, then we should not allow ourselves to be bounded by driving distance or by the cost of an airplane ticket. Let's go where we can be taken seriously as experts and engage customers on what their priorities are instead of on what our geographic limitations might be. You'll notice a couple of caveats there. Pre-sales, sales function and pre-sales, and relationship management on the back end. That before and after window is where we're going to benefit from having the opportunity to have real in-person support. My definition then is we begin to expand as soon as we can realistically provide a human in territory to be able to go and meet with the customers and convince them, I'm not just a virtual, avatar over here in a window. We are real. We are substantial, and we can service your needs. Here's how we deal with that from a data center perspective, right? So I think that it is, there's a lot of details, but the one thing that I will say is expanding your reach does not require you to have a physical second facility or a second operating entity as a business. I think one of the hardest things small solution providers will ever learn to do is to open a second office in another geography. And whether that's, a 2-hour drive away or a 2-day airplane journey, in any case, opening that second office and replicating the processes, the cultural impact, the leadership oversight, the actual accountability and control mechanisms, that's incredibly difficult to maintain the consistency between multiple offices. People have struggled with that for generations, and it's still very difficult. But you'll notice that doesn't have anything to do with technology. That's the human dynamics of managing an organization. We can provide exactly the same alert monitoring and management and systems administration and patching and incident management services in a cybersecurity world right down the street or all the way around the world. No technological barriers.
Ryan, in the course of answering my previous question, you also gave a little bit of a preview of what I wanted to ask about for my next question, which was some of the factors that you do want to consider as you're expanding geographically to put yourself in a better position. And as you were mentioning some of them, you did talk about how in terms of looking at threat landscape, it's pretty similar everywhere globally, so that really shouldn't be too much of an impediment. I think that's largely true, but would you not agree that there might be some exceptions to that rule? Like, for example, if you're doing something like managed threat intelligence, the particular types of feeds or information that you might want to give to a client that's, let's say, maybe in the Baltics, bordering Russia, might be different than a client that might be in, Latin America. The Russian targets, you're going to want to focus a little bit on the TTPs that are associated with the Russian groups like Cozy Bear. Latin America, you might focus a little bit more on, is my client potentially going to try to be somebody going to try to impersonate them in some kind of a banking Trojan scam, since that's kind of a bit more of a problem in that particular region. So for certain things, or maybe like pen testers who are looking for the most common ways that bad guys are going to try to get into your particular organization, you do need to be a little bit more aware of geographically what you might be at higher risk for. Do you not agree with that?
It's a terrific point. I think that there are layers there. I don't think that the geography of the client makes them any more or less likely to be targeted by, say, a group from Russia. We deal with that here in the U.S. every day, right? Something obviously that they can land and launch. They can launch it from wherever they are and land it anywhere that the customer happens to be. But there's going to be cultural currency, right? There's going to be the prevailing conversation. What are we paying attention to in the news? What's affecting us in our real non-technical lives? What is it that we are most likely to encounter? That's how you would be segmenting, right? Think of it as cultural themes based on client location more than geography. that's definitely going to be an issue. But you touched on the one that I think deserves the super important asterisk, which is pen testing, because a very important segment of that field is in person. It is social engineering. It may be physical access to your facilities. It may be you actually touching machines. Right, there are ways that is going to be a problem above and beyond what you can do over a network. So that's the one neighborhood of service provision that I would say that's going to be very, very local, right? If you think about just kind of the checklist, the fundamentals that need to be true here, regulation is going to come first, because there are some serious consequences to not maintaining data residency regulation compliance. The second thing is going to be language, because nobody wants to have to do business with somebody in a different language unless there's literally no other option. So localization in language is going to be very important. And then beyond that, the vertical market segmentation that would indicate what they are more likely to be exposed to according to their cultural content. I think that while you're going to have some things that are, it's a little hotter for those Russian adversaries to be attacking in Eastern Europe, statistically, not a lot. Right, like they're not limiting themselves to attacks that are only in the adjacent geographies. They're expanding wherever they can, and it's actually kind of a good thing now that we think about it. We can recognize some of those language barriers. Right, one of the key things we're always paying attention to in the fishing business is, does that sound like a native speaker? Does their grammar match what we would expect in business or in conversational settings? And that might be a limitation for them. So that gives us maybe a tiny little bit of a barrier, but in an AI-enabled world where everything can be instantly translated into any language, we can't rely on that anymore.
All right, so you talked about some of the key challenges and factors that you want to be aware of, like culture and language barriers, regulatory considerations, things like that. So for this final question, I'm going to split it into two parts here. This question is going to look at things from the client point of view, both current, already existing clients, and then future clients that you are going to be going after in other geographic markets. So what are your recommendations, Ryan, for A, ensuring that you are not diluting your core services by further expanding your reach? And B, how do you convince prospective new customers in these new markets that a newcomer like you is going to be the better option than the field of the contenders that they're already familiar with within their market?
So number one, I would say the principal question about diluting your capabilities or your human bandwidth for service provision is going to be 24 hours in a day and your ability to follow the clock in target customer destinations. If you are supporting people within the continental US and you've only got 3 time zones to cover, well, you know what? I can staff from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's not that hard, right? But when I'm looking at the other side of the clock for the other side of the ocean, that becomes an operational question that we have to decide, is that something we can and want to staff and manage across our facilities? So that's going to be a go, no go kind of a conversation. Beyond that, I think operationally, it's just a question of effective client onboarding, demonstrating to them established processes for how we interact, how we communicate, how we share reports and information, right? All of that can be standardized, and it shouldn't create any more of an outsized burden on our customer relations than anything that, a client who's just down the street. Caveat, as long as it's something that we can do within those language barriers. The question about marketing, though, is that I think that's a critical thing that we all need to start thinking about. It is equally true that if you are based in Phoenix and you are trying to acquire customers in Las Vegas, as close as those two marketplaces are, customers are going to begin by thinking, hey, you're not from around here. Why should we trust you? That's equally true if you are from Phoenix and Vegas versus Phoenix and Kuala Lumpur, right? They're going to have exactly the same questions of, can you sustain the relationship? Can you meet me on my time zone? Can you actually communicate in my language? Can you actually support my industrial and vertical segment requirements? People make a kind of a mistake when they think, expanding internationally, that's going to be much more challenging to communicate to customers than it is regional. That's simply not true, right? If you're not here, then you have exactly the same challenge. And the solution to that, frankly, I believe, is what we will call the sensu of marketing, right? They are local. We're not limited by their very limited perspective. They are longtime participants in this local marketplace. Well, we are experts across marketplaces. We have customers in many geographies who deal with many kinds of operational challenges, and we understand how to solve those problems, which means that we can be relevant to you. We can customize our approach to match your requirements because that's literally what we do for a living. There's a historical assumption that local makes the difference when it comes to business services. And I will tell you that as soon as those services are handled in a digital environment, the only thing the customer will ever interact with is the salesperson that they talk to, the account manager who is responsible for shepherding them through the onboarding process, and then that account manager customer success facility on the back end who makes sure that they are getting the right care and feeding across this relationship structure. Some of us like to think that our customers want to come and take a tour of our data center and that might somehow create a competitive position. Look at me, I have actual physical facilities in the geography. But we lose every single day to people whose data centers are located somewhere in the cloud, and we don't think twice about the location of those facilities. It's a question of whether you can have a human relationship. And that is something we can scale up with a minor investment in local human capabilities that takes advantage or leverages the mass capability that we have back in our data center and our SOCs. All right, everybody. This is a big topic, and it's something that we think you guys are, you've given us the indication this is something on your mind, especially as we're dealing with the interesting challenges in the economy right now. So what are you guys thinking about? We'd love to hear some feedback from you on this topic. What works? What hurts? What is your experience in the question of expansion across geographic boundaries? Have you done it? Did it work? And would you give us some advice on how we can do this a little bit more effectively? You can reach us at our email address, cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com. And we'd love to keep that conversation going. Right now, though, I want to shift into our next segment, which we like to call Dear Cyber for Hire. This is an advice column segment where we get the opportunity to manage the relationships, be a little bit of a marriage counselor between MSSPs and the clients who pay for their services. Now, the following letter that we're going to share has been anonymized to protect the innocent, but this is definitely a real challenge that we see in the field. So, Bradley, let me hand it over to you. What do we need to know in the relationship world today?
All right, thanks, Ryan. Yes, indeed, we are back with even more juicy MSSP melodrama, and this one comes from the client side of the relationship. So, fellas, cue the music. Dear Cyber for Hire, just call me client number 24601, because that's what I am to my partner. A number, not a name. Just another faceless cog in the machine. And to think when my MSSP was still courting me, they made me feel so special, like one in a million. But I sure wasn't treated like that once the ink was dried on our contract. Nope, suddenly I was just another in a long line of clients. You see, it turns out my MSSP prefers everything standardized across its customer base. Same philosophical approach, same procedures and processes, same default solution set, minimal customization, no realization that each one of us has our own unique needs. Maybe standardization helps simplify things for them, but it's not what's in my best interest. Speaking of standards, maybe mine are too low, and I should be looking for a new MSSP who's willing to treat me like the special unicorn I am. Sincerely, even if I gave you my name, I'd still be anonymous to my MSSP in Chicago. Ryan, an MSSP certainly should aim to cater to the individual needs of its clients. Still, you do need to have some uniform standards, right? I mean, you're not going to partner up with a million different network security vendor partners, one for each client, because this vendor's tool set matches best with this client, et cetera, et cetera. But, if you are doing, again, something like pen testing or threat intelligence services, then maybe that is an area where you can be a little bit more flexible in the manner in which you conduct your OffSec operations or how you deliver your threat feeds. So, I don't know, what's your take on this situation?
I think this is the one most universal, predictable response that you're going to get when you deal with customers in any new environment, right? Whether it's a new service provider across, as we've been discussing, across a geographic boundary into a new vertical segment. Whatever worked for you before, that's fine and good, but it's different here, and I don't think you understand. Now, I'm paraphrasing just barely slightly because I've personally just returned from over a month traveling internationally to meet with clients in 9 different countries and across many, many geographical boundaries. And in 100% of those meetings, in spite of the credibility that we have, in spite of past communications, in spite of everything we do to build credibility, the first reaction that we get from 100% of those people is, it's all fine and good that you know what you're doing over there, but it's different over here. That's universal. But that flies directly in the face of our quest for standardization in service provision. This might be the most passionate, almost religious fervor type conversation across the industry. Standardization versus customer engagement. Standardization is the product. It's the platform for repeatability and consistency that leads to machine grade effectiveness. I completely understand that. Customization is a platform for mistakes, for human error, for driven up cost of service and support. There are many downsides to customization. But we have to admit that these are still humans, these are still independent businesses, and no matter how much easier it would be for us to provide completely standardized offerings, dictating that to a client is the opposite of attractive in a new business development function. There are many very smart people around this industry who will tell you if they don't run the technology that you have standardized on, if they won't convert to match your stack and profile, then you need to tell them, go away and find a different MSP. I completely understand that philosophy from an operational point of view, but I just have to remind people that customers really dislike that philosophy. We have to be careful, we have to be limited, we have to be very systematic about where we allow variation. Variation within boundaries is kind of the philosophy that I would advocate. We have to be very careful about where we allow that. But it has to appear to the customer that we understand them, not just the boxes that reside in their network, not just the systems that they operate, but them as humans, as an organization, as an industry, as an entity of many people who have very hard beliefs about their situation being completely unique. Are they unique? No, they're almost never, right? There are a finite number of business models across industries. There are a finite number of operating dynamics that we will encounter. There are patterns, there are profiles, and there are very repeatable personas that we can apply across different business disciplines. But that's not something you say out loud to a customer because that just sounds really generic, and it sounds like you said, good for you, not good for me as the customer. So we have to be very careful. You'll recall the advice that I gave in the previous segment about expanding geographically. On the front end, you need to talk to a human. In the onboarding process, it needs to feel incredibly personalized. In the account management side, I need to talk to a human who knows me, not just somebody who's reading standard reports, not just somebody who says, this is how we do it here. I need to talk to a human who can personalize what is otherwise a standard application of platform services. It's in the human dynamics. That's how we manage these relationships.
All right, Ryan, very well put. And another relationship saved. Hopefully, our listeners have learned from this and don't make the same mistake. And remember, if you have been struggling with your managed security services relationship, whether you're the user or provider, we want to hear from you. So please write to us at cyberforhire@cyberriskalliance.com, and we might use your letter in a future episode. All right, well, it's almost time to wrap things up, but before we go, we want to get a little random as we share with you, drumroll please, our irrelevant news of the week. Now, this is a real news pitch that Ryan or I have received in our inboxes for reasons that are entirely inexplicable to us. Are you ready, Ryan?
I am ready for the random.
Okay. Well, we started today with video games. We're going to end today with video games.
Sweet.
A study by Cribbage Online analyzed a database of completion times of over 60,000 games across PCs and all consoles in order to determine which took the longest to not just complete the main campaign, but also gather all of the achievements, the unlocks, the secrets, the collectibles, resulting in a 100% completion. So tops on the list is Ancient Domains of Mystery, which is a roguelike game for the PC that takes around 2,000 hours or 83 days to 100% complete. Meanwhile, there was a separate pitch that or a separate data point that came from CSGO Luck or CSGO Luck, which analyzed more than 50 video games renowned for their short play time. They found that the game with the quickest campaign is Dear Esther, a first-person game that can be completed in 1 hour and 20 minutes. But let's go back to the 83 days. Who has that kind of time on their hands, Ryan? I mean, when you play video games, are you the obsessive type who needs to complete all the side quests and get all the upgrades?
My nature is, but my practical reality has cured me of that. You can't afford to disappear from life for 83 consecutive days. You might need to sleep and eat and do that in between. You might also need to have a job, So reality dictates to us, you have to do it in bite-sized chunks, and they can be continuous. I will come back to the same thing, right? I have an attention span that allows me to complete those 2,000 hours over an extended period of time, maybe across the course of a year. That's actually something that I find fascinating, to inhabit a world for an extended period of time. But, I've just come back from doing all these consulting engagements where we were focused on building and improving the performance of professional services organizations and managed service organizations, staffing and service definitions and packaging and repeatable processes and all the like. And it's burned into my brain that the total number of hours in a professional work week from, a 40-hour perspective, that's 2,080 a year. So if you were doing this as just as long as you do a full-time job, that game is an entire calendar year with just 2 weeks off for a vacation.
That game is your second job. That's interesting you say that, Ryan. I mean, I will say I do get also very OCD about trying to complete a full game, and sometimes I am pretty successful at doing it, and I'll go through all the challenges, and then there have been other games that I ended up essentially giving up on the game because there were just so many side quests that I just felt like it, and then I realized it just detoured me too much from the main game to the point at which I just kind of gave up on it all. So that is in my nature to want to complete everything. I think the funny one is that I've recently went back and tried to play all of the Batman Arkham games on the Xbox. And one thing that I noticed that tended to happen is I'd be in the middle of the main campaign trying to, stop the Joker or whatever. And then as I'm going around, the city of Gotham, like trying to complete my next mission, suddenly you'd hear in the background like some poor guy in an alley getting, beat up by a thug going like, oh my God, please, won't somebody please help me? And I'm just like, you're really wasting my time here. I have to, I'm trying to save the entire city, dude. And then but it bothers me. Like, it bothers me that like this, fictional character is going to get beat up forever if I don't like go over to this alley and like stop this crime from happening. So I'm like, oh, fine.
Imagine how the superheroes feel in the real world, right? If you were actually Batman, you would have a nervous breakdown for exactly that same reason. We want to help everybody. We could help anybody. There's just not enough time in the day.
That's true. And I think probably a lot of our cyber professionals and managed services providers feel the same way. Well, anyway, hopefully for those listening today, it didn't feel like it took 83 days to complete this episode of ours, which is now reaching its final moments. But fret not, we will be back again next week with episode number 25. Meanwhile, feel free to check out even more cybersecurity podcast content on the SC Media, MSSP Alert, and Channel E2E websites. Until next time, I'm Bradley Barth.
And I am Ryan Morris. Please reach out to us and let's keep this conversation going, because this topic and many others that we deal with in the industry, we know there's an answer out there. We just got to figure out who has those answers. So we would love to keep this conversation going on our website, on our show page, via our email address, Cyber Risk Alliance, cyber4hire@cyberriskalliance.com. Reach out, let us know how things are going out there and what other topics we can address for you. In the meantime, we will keep this conversation going on the next episode of Cyber for Hire, your inside source for cyber outsourcing.